Hello, this is Philip Ochman. Today we're going to look at a game between Petrosian and Fischer played in the candidates tournament of 59. Now, if you want to learn something about plans in chess, this is the game for you to watch, because this game includes some of the best ideas and the deepest concepts in chess you can ever find. Let's begin. We're going to play with Petrosian's side. So d4 was played, knight f6. We're quickly going to skip through the basic opening moves, and we're going to reach the first critical position. The game starts as Nimzo-Indian, not really the main purpose of this lesson. Still, we will quickly scroll through. Okay, white makes a decision at this point to go for a variation with c5, and that means that basically he gives up the normal approach in this kind of positions that eventually goes for some kind of e4 at some point. Pretty much. Why? Because otherwise he will play with a backward pawn. d4 if c5 has already been played. More or less a matter of taste, because there is a rather easy continuation for white after that. Okay, bishop e7 was played, and now, alright, if something like e4 already doesn't look so good, then how to activate the bishop on c1, that's the question. Okay, and in this position, this is of course the goal, based on the observation. Remember, we're doing observation, which includes threats analysis, includes position observation, trying to pick up highlights of the position in three different categories: highlights of the four criteria, space development, quality of pieces, and material. Second, we're looking at features of the pawn structure, such as weak pawn structures, things of this nature, things for us to work with. Third thing, we're looking at square weaknesses. The idea of position observation is take a look at the position, find things to work with. Basically, we can summarize it at that. Therefore, in this position, really the main issue is the bishop. This is pretty much the only bad piece white currently has. And so how to solve this? Rather easily, b4 was played. Of course, the idea is also to create problems for the opponent with his light square bishop, meaning that after we will play bishop b2, for the opponent to activate his light square bishop, something that will include possible e5, would mean that our bishop on b2 will become active after we exchange on e5. Alright, so this is basically the idea, and the bishop on b2 is not so bad. Its scope actually reaches all the way to e5 through this pawn, and basically it supports the center. So knight e4 was played, bishop b2, knight d7, and bishop d3. f5 was played. Okay, in this position, knight e2 was played by white, and my question for you is why? Why would he go with something like this? Take a moment to think about this. Try to apply the process, try to identify your goals. As white in the original position right here. Okay, so let's continue. Again, it's pretty much all has to do with observation. Observation shows in this case again that there is basically one bad piece, the knight on c3. How to improve it? The knight wants to become more active, maybe on g3, maybe on f4. And besides that, we said that the bishop on b2, his scope reaches e5. Okay, but for the opponent, maybe it's not so hard to do something about it. For example, maybe his bishop can participate in some kind of contest over e5, and that would make it hard for us to play something like knight e5 to improve our position. Okay? And therefore, this is like a double purpose move. This also directly creates a purpose for our bishop on b2. And therefore, knight e2 in this position is the best move, preparing better conditions to play knight e5. So bishop f6 was played. And you see, now it becomes a necessity to have played this move, right? So after castles queen e7, knight e5 becomes possible. Now knight e5, of course it will be not great for black to capture this knight, because it will create this permanently protected pawn on e5, very much decreased mobility for this knight on e4. Really, if there is a pawn on e5, where can this knight go? To g5? Do you really want this? Not me, right? Overall, this knight is practically immune from capture, because the results of the capture are clearly to white's favor. On the other hand, you can say, look at black. He's got a small problem with space, in terms of really his pieces are a bit cramped. He also wants to develop. How can he develop his bishop? There is this, I would say, typical idea in this kind of positions to develop the bishop all the way to h5. Some kind of stonewall system that black is applying here. Right? But how can this be possible? This knight on d7 doesn't look like it's moving anywhere, again because of the space limitation that black has. So this is the argument in favor of capturing this knight. I want to simplify the position a little bit, therefore reduce the practical effect of the space advantage, and therefore enable some kind of possible better development for my pieces as black. But again, simply this move doesn't pass the safety check, because after white takes back with the pawn, white's space advantage increases, black's pieces become really worse, the bishop and the remaining knight, bishop on f6, so it's simply not worth it. Simply not worth it. Okay, if we're playing black, okay, we have these problems. Our problem is how to complete our development. And this is therefore the goal. Completing the development is a problem that we have to solve. How can we even think of completing the development if we don't have any place to put our knight from d7? The solution here is a bit artificial, but in these cases where the position is closed and basically there is no direct attack, it's okay to play sometimes artificial solutions, and artificial means something that it looks inconsistent and something that's not naturally fluent with the position. In other words, doesn't look like we're making progress. But here the progress is in solving the problems. Alright, so for us to find space to put our knight on d7, we need to move the bishop away from f6. How can we do it? Of course, there is no good square for this bishop. We come to the conclusion that the queen is actually misplaced, queen on e7, because the bishop would actually like to be on e7 in this position, for the reason that we want to clear the f6 square, at least maybe for the knight. Okay, and alright, so what can we do? The queen can go back to e8, then maybe it can re-emerge something like on h5. Maybe. For now the queen will just stay on e8 because it of course will not be urgent to improve the queen from there. It is much more urgent to complete our development as black. And after that maybe even the capture will become possible, because then there will be at least a reasonable location to go back with the bishop, compared with the g5 location. If the knights are exchanged at the moment, pawn takes back on e5, bishop has to go to g5, which is of course a square where the bishop is not doing anything. Right? And so queen e8, just making room for the bishop to retreat. Very artificial, looks artificial, but this is one of the features of objectivity in chess. Objectivity means that we will not care that much how a plan or a certain sequence of moves look like. We only care about what they do in terms of, do they solve problems, do they answer the goals, and here the answer is yes. Alright, so this passive looking move is actually okay, and it gives the game with still chances for black to some kind of reasonable position. After what happened in the game, which is the unbelievable knight takes e5, a big positional mistake by Fischer, d takes, there is no good square for the bishop. And the knight is also in some kind of trouble here. And so bishop g5 was played. And this bishop is of course very bad, completely out of the game. How to continue here for white? Again, we're making a positional, going through the process where we begin with observation. There are no immediate threats against white. No threats at all. So again, position observation, we discovered that there is a bad piece on e4 and there is a bad piece on g5. The goal becomes to see if we can somehow take advantage of that. How can we take advantage of that? First thing that comes to mind is to directly attack them. Look at the knight on e4. Why am I calling this knight a bad knight? It's so centralized, right? The problem is it has nowhere to go, pretty much. So if it's attacked, it cannot retreat. How can I attack it in such a way that actually endangers this knight? Of course f3. But f3 suddenly, we notice, doesn't pass the safety check. After bishop takes e3 check, the knight can retreat back to g5. Alright, so f3 has to be prepared. And that means, again, white is going to improve his position, while black is going to struggle not to lose the knight. Right? How to prepare f3? In this game, bishop d4 was played, simply protecting the pawn. Again, for black, threats analysis, f3, direct threat. And there is only one solution. This is of course very sad for black, but bishop h6 is the only move. If not this, there is nothing else. And this is very sad, because not only the bishop is horrible, but after f3 that was actually played, now the knight is also horrible. And the knight that's so horrible makes the bishop even worse by blocking it. So due to this positional mistake of the exchange of knights over the e5 square, black's position becomes already, at this point, strategically lost. Simply lost. The reason? Black has many problems, many strategical problems, to which it's very hard to even begin imagining a solution. The game continues. White's turn to play in this position. And with all that's been said, and how better white's position is, one of the main arguments that objectivity, the objective approach to chess has, is that your position can look like the best position in the world. But if you don't have progress, then you're not really better. Okay? So objectively, we will have to find something that actually improves white's position. Because white clearly looks better. White has better space, white has better pieces, practically no positional problems at all versus two very serious problems for black. Right? So on the paper, white looks much better. But this is not an objective conclusion. An objective conclusion to say that somebody is better would be based on the plans that he has to improve his position compared to his opponent's plans. And so we look at this position, white to play, and we need to come up with a real plan for improvement for white, taking advantage of what looks like a better position. How can we do that? So let's perform an observation. Of course, there are no threats against white in this position. Moving on to positional observation. In this case, okay, we have the bishop pair, but both bishops are completely blocked. One of the goals, therefore, becomes to activate our bishops. Unblock the position. Open the position in any way. And this is one goal. What else? Basically, if we don't have any other problems, if we don't have any other weaknesses, pawn structure-wise, we can say that this is the major goal. Okay? Of course, you can say you can improve the knight on it too, but this is not something urgent in this position at all, and this can always be done. Something like knight f5 is a constant option. Alright, how in the world can I improve my bishops? Clearly, improving the bishop on d3 is not something that I can do. It's not something that depends on my decisions, as long as the pawn structure of the opponent remains, and I cannot change it successfully. Of course, without improving his position. If I push e4, it solves all of his problems. So what else remains? Suddenly, I notice something else in the position. I'm looking at the bad pieces, besides the bishop on d4, which is again not exactly a bad piece because it holds the center and so on. It's just a piece that can be improved, that should be improved. We notice that the queen and the rook are on the same dark square diagonal. This gives us some ideas. So we want to open up our bishop. We notice a location for the bishop that can take advantage of some kind of weird setup that the opponent has with his pieces. And immediately we find a solution to this goal. c6, that was actually played in the game. We create a square, meaning the pawn is untouchable, cannot be captured. If it's captured, not only that he will lose the exchange, he will also lose much more, because now on the open file there are a set of double isolated pawns. Of course, again, this will only reinforce the previous statement that the game is lost. But what happens if he doesn't capture? What happens if he just pushes b6, as actually happened in the game? This is actually not better, because now, once the pawn already advanced to c6, there is no hope anymore. There is no hope at all developing the c8 bishop. Practically, simply it cannot be done. After b5 was played, the light squares are sealed around this bishop. He can never develop. As simple as that. So this game shows a very beautiful case of positional domination. As a result of Black's positional mistake, notice that Black's positional mistake was done through a tactical choice. Alright, tactics and positional effects are part of one big picture. Every tactic has a positional effect. Every tactic's purpose is eventually positional, right? The reason you initiate some kind of tactical play is because you want to improve parts of your position, improve some features of the four criteria, the pawn structure, or some square weaknesses, right? So the positional problem that Fischer created was created through a tactic of the exchange of knights, and he suffered from it until this point where simply his position became unplayable. There are, as simple as that, there are no moves. Right? a6, of course, does nothing after a4. Exchange of rooks. There are no good moves for Black. And Black is just waiting for White to invade his position and create more threats, eventually putting a lot of pressure on his c7 weak pawn. Again, I cannot stress out how beautiful this position is for White. And I will tell you, one of the greatest things that I find interesting about chess, and what I find as being fun, is just simply to enjoy, simply the sadistic joy you have to see the opponent suffer in such a position as Black. I can tell you there aren't too many things in life that can make you feel so good about yourself. Yes, I'm that kind of person. Knight f7 has been played, queen c3, queen h4, I'm skipping to the next critical position. In this position, black tries to create some kind of activity, hoping to target f3, create some kind, but there is really nothing here. There is really nothing. He cannot even incorporate his rook. So of course there is no hope. There are too many defenders, and there is no hope for any kind of attack. Rook a1 was played, knight g5. Queen e1, of course, if the reasonable pieces that black has are exchanged, he will be left with his worst pieces, and there will be no way to defend the weakness on c7. After queen h5, rook a7, again, this position, there is no real way, real good way, real successful good way to defend this c7 pawn. If he does something like queen f7, of course bishop takes b6, there is no way to capture back because of the discovery. If he does something like rook f7, I think this is even worse because now the back rank is weak as well, and I'm starting to calculate actually tactical variations here. We always have to keep an eye on some kind of possible, in the future maybe this will become possible. Here it's of course still not possible, but we can also say, alright, this knight is very limited. I think I'm looking at it, and I think even the simplest h4 simply wins the knight, just as an intuitive refutation to rook f7. Maybe there is something better. I'm not even going to get into this because this is just horrible. And so queen g6 was played instead, but already this is simply too late. Once this pawn falls, there is no hope anymore. So I'll quickly show you just the remaining of the game. Here, of course, there is a small threat to take on f3. Right fork, there is no way to capture back. So queen h1 had to be played, queen h5 again, f4. And after rook takes, the game continues for a number of moves, but there is of course no way to stop the connected passed pawns on the queen side. So bishop takes, simplifying the position, bishop c5, rook g8, and black simply resigned after this move because there is simply no point to continue. There are no threats, no counterplay he can create, and white simply wins in 3 moves. There is no way to stop it. Okay, so this was a very beautiful, in my opinion at least, example of how being aware of your goals through conducting a correct observation gives you the ability to find plans that look very complicated, but in reality, once you understand your goals, they become very easy to find. And Tigran Petrosian showed us his mastery in creating such a positions where he strangles his opponent through accurate positional play. Sometimes the positional play is by creating tactical opportunities, sometimes it's directly, strictly positional moves, it doesn't really matter. Eventually, once you understand your positional goals, you should have your plan set for you and easy to carry out. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. This was Philip Hochman. See you next time.